Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for taking some time to join our monthly webinar series, this installment on early turnover and strategies you may be able to take to start to tackle it. My name is Craig Ellis. I lead the IO psychology team at HighMatch. And so my background is as an assessment nerd, all things psychometrics and selection and developmental assessment. So really excited to have an opportunity to present to you all today. Hoping that you find it helpful and insightful and informative. And certainly at the end, we'll have some time to answer questions or schedule additional time if you'd like to chat in a more kind of one-on-one private setting. So I'm going to pass it over to Sarah, who leads our sales and success teams, to kind of queue up the presentation today. And then we'll just dive right into it. So thank you all again so much for joining, and I'll pass it to Sarah.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, kind of from my end as well, thank you everyone for joining us today and for taking the next 30 minutes or so to spend some time learning with us. It's definitely exciting to see everyone. I know when we think early turnover and when we have a lot of these conversations, we often think, jobs like retail, right? Where individuals are coming in with an expectation and they're leaving quickly. But as is represented on the call today and as we're seeing in conversations we're having, this is a hot topic across multiple industries. We're talking to transportation and logistics individuals. We've got manufacturing and warehousing, healthcare. We're certainly seeing that you are definitely not alone in struggling with this concept of early turnover. And so it warranted a really great conversation, which starts really with what is early turnover, and when we say that, how are we defining it? And what we're looking at is turnover that's happening in the first 90 days of employment, right? And that can be voluntary, that can be involuntary, but either way, you've had interviews with these individuals, they look like a promising candidate, you've hired them and they've started, but for whatever reason, they are not making it past that 90-day mark. What we know is that in terms of the time that your recruiters and your hiring managers and your trainers have invested, the money that's certainly been invested, generating those candidates and going through the process, it's a real waste, when they're not really making it to the point where they become productive and then they start making that money back for you. On the flip side, you've also got teams in place that are often strong. They're the ones that haven't turned over. And when you have individuals kind of coming in and out like a revolving door, that can certainly disrupt those dynamics and the productivity that have been working so well for so long. So certainly an issue, kind of looking at the bottom, we're hearing that 30% of new hires leave in the first 90 days. So we're talking about 1 in 3 that aren't making it to the point of productivity, which is certainly an issue worth digging into and worth solving. Really the first step in that is to identify what's causing that early turnover. And we hear a wide variety of reasons, at the top of which is really a misalignment, and that can be misaligned expectations. This role sounded really exciting and really cool, and I've known forever that to test video games would be awesome. And then I got on the job and they just want me to run around the edge and figure out where there's a glitch, right? Whatever it may be. So there's a misalignment there in what they thought the role could be. Often there's a misalignment in the culture, and so an individual is uncomfortable and can leave. There can be a misalignment of the skills that they actually possess or that they bring to the table, of abilities in order to do the role. Maybe it's connecting with your clients or a certain type of problem solving that they need. So certainly misalignment in any form can cause an individual to quickly either need to or decide to leave. But we're also seeing things like a lack of perceived support. So they get in the role, they thought that they were going to work with a manager of a certain type and it becomes different. A lack of their own engagement, for any reason of those misalignments that we talked about. And I kind of touched on culture there. So when we work with our clients, one of the first things that we're looking to do is to really start to uncover all of the things that are going on, that could be causing turnover. And that way we can take the necessary next step, which is to really start to identify some practical solutions or strategies that you might implement in order to mitigate those. So as promised, you're here to talk to Craig, so I'm going to hand it over to him to talk through what those strategies and solutions could look like.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And so, obviously, whenever we're talking with our clients and organizations who are having an issue with early turnover, one of the first things that we ask is, well, what steps are you taking? What have you done to this point to try to mitigate that issue? And so we hear things like, well, we've tried to bring more consistency to our interviews, our screening interviews, and our hiring manager interviews. We've tried to ask the right kinds of questions up front. Either we've embedded them in our application, or our recruiters are told these are the things that you ask to try to evaluate alignment on some of those basic qualifications and cultural items that Sarah referenced on the previous slide. And so all of these different strategies have merits in their own right and might be effective depending on the situation that an organization finds itself in. What I want to do is take a little bit of time to talk about two that we've seen be particularly effective, especially in high volume entry-level roles, and then unpack a few case studies where we've seen organizations utilize different techniques as part of their hiring and screening process as a way to really target very directly the early turnover issue that they've experienced. And so the two that we're going to talk about are thoughtfully delivered screening questionnaires, as well as video-based realistic job previews. And so screening is critical. Whenever there's an early turnover issue, screening is hyper critical, right? And so the idea behind effective screening is defining what are the things that we need candidates to be aligned on in order to warrant putting them into the hiring process. And then how do we evaluate basic alignment on those things? And so some organizations, maybe some of you on this call, leave that to the recruiters to have those 15-minute, 10-minute screening conversations after they conduct a basic resume review, right? So review a resume, invite a candidate to a conversation, and then on that screening interview, they're asking the same list of questions. This is the pay, this is the work schedule, this is the environment that you'll be working on, and do you have reliable transportation? And so obviously the challenge with that is that requires someone's time and energy. It requires the candidate to be available at the time that your recruiters are available. And so it inserts a measure of inefficiency into your process. In some cases, we hear organizations say, we've got an AI tool that parses resumes and it tells us which ones we should talk to based on the resumes that it's parsing. And won't spend a lot of time talking about the quality or lack thereof of some of those tools, but we've heard that some organizations have found those less effective than they want them to be. And even in other cases, organizations have embedded those types of questions, right? So, what pay are you expecting? What's your level of experience? Do you have a driver's license or reliable transportation? Have embedded those kinds of questions into their application itself. And the challenge with that is when candidates are in I'm in applicant mode, they see an application as a barrier. And their goal is to break down that barrier as quickly and easily as possible. And so when you ask them in the context of an application, do you have a reliable transportation? It is a thoughtless yes from them every time. Their goal is to get to a person. You tell them, hey, this is the pay. Are you comfortable with this pay? Even if they're thinking, not exactly, they're in application mode. So they're going to say yes, because their goal is to get to the next step in the process. And so one of the things that we've seen be very effective is post-application, the delivery of a screening questionnaire that includes the same types of questions, but it has the benefit of feeling like an advancement to the candidate. Hey, we've reviewed your application. We think you might be a great fit for the job. As you prepare to enter into the rest of the hiring process, we want to ask some basic alignment questions to qualify that you're going to be a good fit for this particular position, and then deliver the screening questionnaire off the back of that. Now you've gotten them out of rapid fire application mode, and you've gotten them into, do I fit with this particular position mode? And so asking those questions in the context of a questionnaire gives you the ability to intelligently filter good fitting candidates to the top of your candidate funnel, candidate pool, as well as be very objective about which candidates have the basic qualifications, the basic job alignment in order to justify putting someone on the phone with them and talking through the ins and outs of the position. And so it really serves two important purposes. One, it brings some efficiency and objectivity to the process. Candidates can complete it on their own time. They can take it on their mobile phone. It feels painless to them, much different than an application, which often feels quite painful. And it also has the added benefit of whenever a recruiter is getting on the phone, they've been pre-qualified through a questionnaire that's directly targeted at some of the areas of misalignment that are often responsible for causing early turnover. And so a thoughtfully developed, well-timed, efficient screening questionnaire can be a very useful tool in filtering misaligned candidates out of the process very early on. Another tool that we've seen be effective, and I'm going to try to get this video to play while I'm talking here. Another tool that we've seen be effective, sometimes in conjunction with or at other times separate from a screening questionnaire, is a video-based realistic job preview. A lot of data in the academic research on realistic job previews. I saw an article, basically a meta-analysis that reviewed about 40 different publications in academic journals about the effectiveness of realistic job previews. And all the results were extremely positive. Better performance, lower early turnover, lower long-term turnover, better commitment, better engagement. And so the goal of a realistic job preview is to present candidates early on in the hiring process with as clear a picture of the job as you possibly can, in an effort to give them the opportunity to select themselves out before they're hired, right? And so oftentimes, one of the things that happens is that, like Sarah referenced earlier, candidates have a vision of what they expect the job to be. Oftentimes, recruiters are selling them on the organization and that vision, and then they get into the role and they realize, oh, this isn't what I thought I was signing up for, right? The environment is uncomfortable, the pace is too fast, the customers are sometimes a little ornery. And so there are aspects of the job that they might recognize are there to some degree, but they don't have a full understanding of exactly what they're signing up for. And so a really well-developed video-based realistic job preview presents the organization, presents the benefits and drawbacks of the particular role. It gives them a very clear vision into this is where you will be working and this is what you will be doing. This is the job you're signing up for. You know, we sometimes jokingly refer to it as like pre-marriage counseling, right? Where there's an element of before we say our vows, we want to make sure that we know what we're getting. And so that there's this psychological contract that underlies a realistic job preview, which says, hey, we want to be transparent about the role that you're signing up for. We don't want you to feel like we're misleading you. We want to give you a clear vision of what this job is. And then if candidates don't like it, it's to your benefit often as an organization to have them select themselves out of the process at that point. And so extremely effective tool for those high volume positions that have some undesirable elements associated with the position that are really just unavoidable, right? It doesn't benefit the organization to gloss over those or to cover them up. In fact, it benefits them to be transparent with their candidates so that the ones who get to the end of the hiring process already know what the job's going to look like on day one when they show up. And so there's not this risk of culture shock whenever they get into the position that causes them to leave or become disengaged. And it's that disengagement that often leads to the involuntary turnover, where your managers are coming and saying, hey, how did we hire this person for this position? And so the realistic job preview carries a lot of benefits for candidate transparency and also cleaning the candidate pool out of those candidates who are going to leave based on misalignment of expectations. And so those are two of the tools that we've seen be extremely effective at addressing the early turnover problem in high volume entry-level positions. What I want to do now is talk through a few different case studies, some real world examples of how we've seen organizations tackle this early turnover problem. And so the first one that I want to touch on is a food distributor who is having issues in their cold storage warehouse with a group of, I think, about 20% of candidates who they couldn't keep a position filled, essentially. And so in working with them, the solution that we landed on was a minimum qualifications questionnaire with a realistic job preview kind of bolted onto it. And then at later stages in the hiring process, a behavioral personality assessment, as well as a structured interview conducted by hiring managers. And Sarah, I know you worked pretty closely with them through implementation and then thereafter. So I wanted to give you a chance to kind of weigh in on some of the benefits that they saw.
Yeah, absolutely. These are reach truck operators, right? So they're the guys in the actual warehouse. But what it really boiled down to when we got to know that role was it's a hectic environment. It's very fast paced, and with it being cold storage, it's just really uncomfortable working conditions. It's cold storage in Detroit, right? So those that think they know cold don't know cold until they've stepped inside the warehouse. But Craig mentioned there was that subset of the group of reach truck operators who they just could not fill. And so what we were able to do was put this process in place, effectively fill all of the open positions that they had, and then start to kind of track how they were performing and how they stayed. And we talked about sub 90-day turnover. Theirs was really closer to 30, so it was very ineffective in terms of getting those individuals hired. But at where we stand right now, I know all of the roles that they filled have made it well past the 90-day mark, forgive me, which really got the attention of the executive team, because this has been a problem for something like 2 to 3 years. But the recruiters felt like they just had a really great understanding of the candidate. They were much happier with the data that they had to actually make the offers, and are seeing the positive effects of that off the back of it. So definitely a great story for them.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I saw a question come through. It's a great question. We'll make sure to get to that one at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Just another example, and you'll see that we tend to think about kind of the candidate evaluation process as this funnel, right? Where we're narrowing in on the candidates who are likely to be the best fit through a series of evaluation steps. And so in this case, again, high volume, entry level position. This is an organization that does outsourced technical and customer support. So an organization has a large customer base. Their customer base is often calling in and asking questions about, how do I use your website, or how do I log into my account? And so they outsource those calls to this organization. And so one of the challenges that this organization was having is they're bringing in candidates from a wide variety of backgrounds. So retail, in some cases, folks fresh out of high school who might have had some basic technical training as part of their high school. In some cases, substitute teachers, or folks who were just looking for a way into a more technology-centered career. And so one of the challenges that they were having was yes, there was an element of misaligned expectations. And so we helped them build out a custom screening questionnaire to communicate some of those expectations and ensure that candidates understood, like, hey, this is a job where 8 hours a day you'll be taking calls, you'll be working on computers, you'll be responding to emails, you'll be sitting in a chair on site. It's not a hybrid or remote position. So being very transparent about what the role was, not in video form, but in text form. But for them, one of the key misalignments that they were experiencing was they were bringing in candidates who performed well in interviews and looked like they had the right type of background, but who didn't have the basic level of computer literacy to be able to receive the training and get through training effectively. And so they were having candidates who looked like the ideal candidate, bring them into training, and then within 6-7 days of training realize, oh, they're just not going to be able to pick it up because they don't have the basic level of computer literacy necessary to be able to take to the training. And so similar problem in that very early turnover within the first 3 weeks often, but extremely different reason that turnover was happening. In their cases, candidates would get in, say, oh, I don't know what Microsoft Word is. I don't know how to send an email. You said Outlook. I'm not sure that I know exactly what Outlook is. Can you give me some details on that? And so what they needed were folks who had a basic understanding of how to operate their machine efficiently and effectively, so that when they got into training, they could talk about, and here's how you perform the job, as opposed to here's how you turn on your computer. And so again, different kind of solution, but still aimed at that early turnover problem. And then the last one that I'll touch on briefly, I know we've got 10 minutes left and we're going to be respectful of your time, I promise. Different role, very different expectations. So this particular organization was a partner of the government in performing background checks for defense and intelligence type positions, right? So someone applies for a government position that requires a clearance. This company comes in, helps investigate the background of the applicant, the individual who's applying for that clearance, so that they can qualify that they're not a security threat. And so for them, complex, challenging job. The environment for them isn't the challenging part. It's the pace, it's the self-reliant, on your own individual nature of calling references and verifying employment backgrounds and conducting interviews with sources on the person who's applying for the clearance. And so for them, they needed to utilize a realistic job preview so that folks understood just the volume of work. They're interviewing strangers, they're collecting information on people who sometimes don't want to give that information. And so there's a stress and some resilience that's necessary to be successful in that environment. So partnered with them to help them develop and implement a realistic job preview, in addition to a few other assessment modules around culture fit and behavioral fit, basic problem solving ability. And then theirs was unique in that one of the reasons that folks were turning over early on is they were bringing in people who had an investigation background in like law enforcement or military investigation. And so it's a very different style of investigation when you're doing background investigations for clearance. And so it was important for them to get some understanding of how their candidates would handle certain situations that were common to the job, to ensure that whenever they were an employee, they weren't going to create conflict and unnecessary tension in the way that they were performing those investigations. So a situational judgment assessment became a critical part overall of that solution. And I think the important part, as we move towards wrapping up, is early tenure turnover is a bit of a pandemic problem, not pandemic like COVID pandemic, but something that's experienced by everyone across industries, across different job levels and geographical regions. And the way to address it often varies depending upon factors associated with the job and the organization and the candidate pool. And so there are elements that we've seen be effective in those different industries and at those different levels, but ultimately the deployment of those elements has to be thoughtful and intentional and highly tailored to the organization and the problem that organization is having. And so I'm not the salesperson. I don't want to, put in a plug for, our sales team. And so I'm going to throw to Sarah to give you a little information about how we partner with our clients and support our clients. And then I'll bounce back at the end to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, I'll be the one jumping in about the timeshare. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. So, what Craig alluded to, right, is kind of at a high level that there is certainly commonalities across the industries in terms of experiencing the frustration that is, this early turnover. But the solution often looks very different. And that's really kind of our whole approach in working with our clients. And it's really understanding at your organization and in the roles that you're experiencing this frustration within, what is the driving factor behind that, right? So, whether or not assessments with us are the answer, right, or they're the answer kind of in general, we just like to highlight that our approach is really taking a very consultative, and personalized approach to working with these individuals, uncovering a lot of the why that we talked about in the beginning, And then really kind of working through step by step all of the options that we have in terms of gathering the insights that you need to be able to definitively say, this person is not, in fact, misaligned with our culture, or they're not misaligned with the skills that we know are necessary. So certainly something that conversations we're having every day as much as you're experiencing, and something that we're happy to talk more about if you're interested. I know in terms of us specifically, you heard Craig talk about a couple different options at the screening level. When we work with our clients, we can do more than just what we talked about today. And sometimes mitigating that turnover looks more into the final interview and what you might want to gather there. We also look at stuff like development. Once you've got them hired, how do you continue to invest into those individuals to really drive that retention past the 90-day mark? So a ton of different options here, just trying to highlight a few of those. But I think most importantly is this piece here. I'll do one last shameless plug for my side. If this is something that you've been looking into, you think that assessments might be a good help in mitigating that early turnover, and you'd like to talk to someone on my team, the QR code on the right is your friend. I'll also drop some links in the chat, but that'll get you in touch with a product specialist. Otherwise, I'll let Craig highlight the other option that you have for sure.
Yeah, and if you want to talk some about the experiences that your organization is having, maybe some of the things that you've tried that haven't, I don't know, taken root, and you want to have that conversation without a sales agenda, and you really just want to kind of chat through it, then me or someone on my team would love the opportunity to hear what's going on, and to maybe serve as a bit of a sounding board around a conversation about early tenure turnover that you all are experiencing. So just wanted to present you with a couple of different options depending on where you're at in your kind of life cycle of addressing this challenging problem. And so I know we had one question that I want to answer. If there are any other questions, please drop them in the chat, or if you prefer to ask them in a more private setting, feel free to book some time with either Sarah's team or myself and my team. So the first question that I saw was, do we have an example or templates of early screening questions? We are very interested in questions asked to identify culture fit. And so, yes, we certainly have templates around those screening questionnaires. One of the ways that we've assisted organizations in assessing for culture fit early on is by building out a cultural profile that is comprised of different behavioral competencies or values and preferences to really attack it from two different perspectives. Certainly, we want to make sure that there's alignment on basic job qualifications, but oftentimes to extend beyond job qualifications, we want to dig in and get to know the organization and their culture, and then really build out an assessment process that is uniquely tailored to what they mean when they say they're a good fit for our organization. Do you mean they're detail oriented or organized, or they're assertive or competitive, or that they're a lifelong learner? And so the specific solution that we would recommend for evaluating culture fit, oftentimes depends on the specific cultural questions that you're trying to solve. So great question, Priscilla.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, Craig, we had one more question come in that I think you're definitely best suited to answer, but we had someone ask, how's the job preview different than them as a recruiter doing like an on-site walkthrough or kind of walking them through the environment that would be tough?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest difference really isn't in terms of the content, right? So the walkthrough, the goal is the same. You're wanting them to see the way that the position is done. You're wanting them to get a feel for what they might look like in the day-to-day in that job. I think the biggest difference is the job preview is a way to do that efficiently in a way that is candidate friendly and more flexible. I think the walkthrough demands that someone take time out of their schedule, that whoever is doing the walkthrough is enough of an expert to talk through some of those ins and outs of what their experiences will likely be. And so we often see the job preview being a nice alternative to that can be delivered digitally very early on in the process, and less time consuming for the organization or its recruiters or hiring managers. And so certainly same idea as the walkthrough, just delivered in a way that's a little more palatable for candidates and often organizations as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know we're coming up against time and it's 1:30. I know we've got one more question that I'd love to get answered, but for those that have to jump, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Hopefully Zoom is being our friend, and you'll see Michael dropping into the chat to the left or to the right. My goodness. The links that are behind those QR codes. So if the link's easier, definitely feel free to click on one of those, and that way you can connect with either a product specialist or one of our IOs. But thank you guys so much. Craig, I think the last question is that we talked about job previews and screeners as tools to help reduce early turnover, but are there additional solutions that we should be looking at as well?
Yeah, I think it always depends on the problem that the organization is trying to solve and the root cause of that turnover, right? And so we mentioned basic computer literacy. The solution for that particular client without basic computer literacy probably wouldn't have been effective. That was just a critical element in what was causing the early tenure turnover. And so we have certainly different styles of assessments and modules that we pair with those screening questionnaires and job previews, depending upon the root cause of the turnover at a given organization. So in some cases, it's a culture fit or it's a personality issue. In some cases, it's a problem solving or cognitive ability issue. And so there are certainly oftentimes other assessment modules that we want to pair with the screening questionnaires and job previews to maximize the effectiveness of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great example. The food distributor that we looked at, one of the abilities, right, cognitive aptitude, wherever you may be, was a critical piece to screen out at the top. And that way they weren't having individuals that thought it would be nice, but those that had actually driven a reach truck.
Yeah.
So it can certainly be helpful. I know we have, Craig and I have a couple minutes that we have set aside to hang on. So if there's any other questions, definitely feel free to drop those over to the Q&A. We're happy to answer. If not, again, kind of sending up a Hail Mary to the Zoom gods to make sure those links work on the right. I think anything else from, nope, I don't see any other questions. Craig, anything else from your side?
No, I think, just thank you all so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us for 30 minutes and talk about early turnover. This is one installment in a monthly series of webinars that we'll be conducting. So follow High Match on LinkedIn if you would like to be in attendance for the next one. We'll certainly send out communications about the topic and the timing, but would love to have you attend. And would love to talk with you individually as well. So thank you all so much for your time and attention. We very much appreciate it. And have a great rest of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. All right. I think we're good.
Well, it actually looks like we have a few people still on. I mean, feel free to, if you have any questions, you can throw them into chat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the chat or the Q&A. Happy to answer. Happy to go back. You think Zoom would tell us when people were typing? All right. Well, awesome. I think we are going to call it. I think you guys, or we thank you guys so much for joining. Hopefully we'll be talking to you soon. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.